take number 4 because of technical difficulties. So I entitled my presentation Helping the Souls of the Dead. When Helia did her co-teaching assignment, she talked about an Iranian Islamic ritual of death and dying. And one of the things that stood out to me when I was doing the class prep was the similarity between Islam's view of the dead and my own religion's view. And so that is what I'm going to talk about in this presentation. So here's my Eid ritual. It's Sadaqah in Islam, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, and I apologize. So, Sadaqah in Islam is a voluntary action of charity. This could be something like giving food to the poor, making money donations to charitable organizations, helping someone in need, volunteer work. It's pretty broadly conceived in mainstream Islam. And the important point to note is that Sadaqah is a virtuous deed performed without expecting anything in return. And this is precisely what makes the deed valuable. So importantly for our discussion, Sadaqah can be combined with prayer and done on behalf of someone who's died to help their soul in the afterlife. The word Sadaqah literally means righteousness and is derived from an Arabic root which means truthfulness or sincerity. Because Sadaqah is defined broadly, there are many ways to benefit the soul of the departed. So one author that I cite, Ali Raza, gives some examples. He says Sadaqah can be passing on knowledge or giving advice, smiling at people, providing aid, sacrificing time for the benefit of others, being patient with others, forgiving wrongs, respecting authority. In a funeral setting, you can do Sadaqah on behalf of the soul of the deceased person. And this can be things like providing funds for the funeral, since in Islam, funerals don't have to be expensive, but people often want to have an expensive funeral to honor the soul of their departed loved one. It can be things like feeding the needy, because in Islam, there's a strong tradition of hosting a meal at the end of the funeral. And this meal is to feed the poor, and it's done for the soul of the person who's died. Another way is donating the deceased person's personal belongings, because usually there would be some sentimentality around those that you would be sacrificing for the sake of other people. Funding religious projects is also something that happens at or around funerals. And this would be like making donations to a mosque for its maintenance, or building a mosque, but doing it in the name of the person who has died for the sake of their soul. And those are ideas that I got from the Parting Goodbyes website on my bibliography. Now, the hermeneutic approach. Um, so Garrett Como, who we read in class, here's a little quote from him. He says, the work of ritual criticism is the work of discovering, formulating, utilizing, and questioning presuppositions and criteria. And I phrased it a little differently on the slide to help parse it out a little more. And then another tool that I used was the processes of sacralization that we learned, which gave me a place to begin my analysis. I noticed when I was thinking and reading about this ritual that there is a process of sacralization involved here from the Belk et al. Article. And specifically, I thought about sacralization through gift giving, because Sadaqah is always about giving something, whether material things like money and food or intangible things like time and effort. However, I think there's some nuance. It's not necessarily that the gift becomes sacred, but that the act itself is sacred. Furthermore, there's a sense in which sacredness is then transferred onto the soul of the departed person. I noticed that there's also degrees to this. More and greater sadaqah makes the soul more sacred in a sense. There's a logic of more is better from what I've read. So that's an important point that transitions me into my hermeneutic lens of Marxism. Just keep that in mind, more is better. So with the Marxist hermeneutical lens, we can look at the power structures playing out in a ritual and determine their ethicality from that. And the Islamic ritual of Sadaqah places an emphasis on charitable deeds that would require money to perform. So although I noted before, charitable deeds can be done without money. It can be things like smiling, giving advice. At the same time, there's a greater emphasis from what I've read placed on acts defined as Sadaqah Jariyah. And Sadaqah Jariyah are good deeds that keep on giving rather than one-time donations. But they tend to be things like building a mosque, digging a well, building a school, things like that. Those are examples I got from the the author Ali Raza again. Um, these acts are seen as superior for helping the souls of the deceased rather than simply hosting a meal or doing something that is a one-time deal. But the issue that a Marxist would see is that not everyone has access to this kind of wealth that allows them to perform sadaqah jariyah. So are they simply left out? And that brings us to the critical approach. So given this Marxist criticism, how could this Islamic ritual be reformed to decrease the harm and increase the good? So first we have to know what the purpose of the ritual is, what the good is, to be able to maximize it. In my opinion, one of the goods with this ritual is that sadaqah can be performed for anyone within the community of Islam who's died, even for multiple people at once. So given this, I propose two reforms. One is de-emphasize the idea that wealth-intensive sadaqah jariyah are more beneficial to the souls of the deceased than smaller acts, and it would help to teach that low-cost charitable deeds are more equal to expensive ones, and this decreases the harm. And then for increasing the good, Islamic communities could create collective funds so that rich and poor can contribute together for the building of schools, mosques, hospitals, and other acts of sadaqah jariyah. Then the spiritual benefit can be applied to uh, many of the souls of the deceased for everyone who's donated, and it'll give access to this kind of this kind of ritual to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford that. Now onto my emic ritual. It's commemoration, or that's the same as saying like prayers for the departed in Orthodox Christianity. I'm going to be using those phrases kind of interchangeably. A commemoration would be more like a prayer offered for someone's soul at a liturgical service, whereas like a private prayer you wouldn't necessarily call a commemoration, but I'll kind of be using them interchangeably. So I'm an Orthodox Christian, so I decided to talk about this death and dying ritual, which I'm familiar with. Um, and I'm familiar with this ritual because I practiced it, but I also did some research, which is where some of what I'm going to talk about comes from. And my sources are at the bibliography at the end. And I think it's important to use outside sources because I find that it's very easy to look at one's own worldview and rituals unobjectively and to lose the benefit of analysis. And that's the lesson that we learned in the Nasirema article we read by Horace Minor, that satirical piece at the beginning of the semester. So after a person dies in the Orthodox faith, it's traditional for the family of the deceased to arrange for 40 divine liturgies to be held, where the priest specifically prays for that person's soul and performs those liturgies in honor of that person. And they're served on 40 consecutive days starting right after the death. And the Divine Liturgy, for context, is kind of the Orthodox equivalent of the Catholic Mass or the Lord's Supper among Protestants. It's like the foundational liturgical service. So in previous times, the family of the person who has died would attend each of the 40 liturgies and offer the bread and the wine used for the Eucharist. Nowadays, however, this practice is less common because people are more busy. So instead, what you'll often see is the family offering the name of the person who's died along with some sort of financial donation to the church or the monastery where the commemoration will happen. And it's good to know Orthodox Christians can also offer commemoration at different times throughout the year, but the 40 liturgies is more typical for someone who's recently died because there's the theology around the first 40 days after death for the soul. And again, it's always customary to offer a monetary donation with the prayer request. On the right, there's just a picture of like a typical commemoration paper you'd write the names on of your departed relatives and give it to a priest. Hermeneutical approach. Um, I'm going to talk first a little bit about what Orthodox Christians hope to accomplish by this ritual to give some context. So I'll be speaking both from my own perspective and from the perspective of the research that I've done. So Orthodox believe that when a person dies, the soul is parted unnaturally from the body and undergoes a journey through the spiritual plane. And the soul is in transit here before it's found worthy by the good deeds that it's done of eternal life, or the deeds that it's done in its life have given the demons rights over its soul, and they can drag it down into their habitation in the underworld. So during this journey of the soul, it's believed to be in extreme peril by Orthodox Christians, and for this reason, they pray especially for the soul's safe passage during this period, which is seen as being around 40 days. And during this time, they'll be praying for the protection of the saints and the angels and for the mercy of God on that soul. So, with all that in theology in mind, you can kind of understand why commemorations are seen as so important. And the liturgy is seen as a particularly auspicious time for prayer and for prayer for the departed. So, still one ethical issue that arises becomes evident when we use the Marxist lens again, the same lens we used for the other ritual, and that's the practice of effectively paying for prayers with donations. So while for the most part giving a donation with the names of the dead is not seen as obligatory, it's definitely a strong custom in the Orthodox world. And the idea originally is to combine the prayer or the request for a prayer with some sort of personal sacrifice to make that prayer more meaningful. Just like the Orthodox of ages past would offer bread and wine for 40 days, which is a sacrifice, it gives the prayer a deeper meaning. The idea isn't that you're compensating the priest or the church or the monastery that will pray for your loved one, but you can see how it very easily shifts into that mindset, which is an ethical concern for sure. So with the misconception, the question then rightly becomes who can offer commemoration for their loved one and why? And is it fair and in line with Christian principles that only the wealthy can offer prayers? And of course not. So the critical approach now, given this understanding of the intended benefit of the ritual, as well as the ethical concern, I propose a reform. And this reform is intended to maximize the benefit and reduce the harm. And the harm that I see is the expectation that a donation is offered with a commemoration request, and the misconception that this donation is a financial compensation. The good that I see is the opportunity to, on the one hand, pray for the reposed, and on the other hand, offer a personal sacrifice of money that makes the prayer more meaningful to you in that it is a sacrifice, not in that it's money. So I propose the following reform. The expectation that money should be offered with a commemoration should be done away with entirely. In my experience, priests will offer prayers for anyone who asks. So it's not, monetary compensation was never in the picture. And it only serves to confuse and create an ethical issue because people don't understand that the purpose of giving the money is to create a personal sacrifice. It's not so that, the priest can be paid. Instead, it should be expected that the person who requests the commemoration perform some sort of personal sacrifice on their own. And this can be things like fasting, almsgiving to the poor, giving your time to someone, physical asceticism, private prayer, anything else that's a sacrifice. In this way, prayers for the dead aren't mixed with economics, and it doesn't become a class issue like the hermeneutic lens of Marxism helps us to see. Here's a quick ritual comparison. Something that's unique to the ritual of Sadaka that I thought about is how this is both a death and dying ritual and can be seen as a meal ritual, which is one of the categories we talked about, because in Islam, the practice of hosting a meal at the funeral for the in memory of the reposed person and specifically hosting this meal for the poor is a very strong tradition. Whereas in Orthodoxy, that tradition at funerals isn't there. In Orthodoxy, there is a need for clergy, whereas in the Islamic ritual, there's no need for clergy. It's something that you do on your own. But then the similarities I thought were more interesting. Both rituals have a more is better logic. More prayers, more commemoration is better for the soul in the Orthodox context, and then in the Islamic context, doing more more sadaqah, more charitable deeds is seen as better. And then doing the sadaqah jariyah, which are the charitable deeds of a greater magnitude, that the gift that keeps giving. Let's see. Another similarity is that both rituals are acted out by the family of the person who's died, and it's done out of love. Another similarity is that these rituals are ongoing. It's not just a one-time thing. You can do charitable deeds in Islam for the sake of your departed relatives throughout your whole life, and the same in Orthodoxy. You can pray for people and offer their name in commemoration, as long as you're around. So just for the sake of time, I'm going to keep going. Quick reflection. So to wrap up, I want to say what this analysis did to my own ritual as an Orthodox Christian. And looking at commemorations through a Marxist lens forced me to see something I would normally wouldn't see, which is how easily a spiritual act can slide into an economic transaction. And more broadly, how easy it is to misinterpret for an understandable misinterpretation of a ritual to become something that itself is harmful. And so the ritual still needs to be reformed. Just even if in essence there was nothing ethically wrong about it, but the perception of it was wrong. And so for that reason, it needs to be reformed. So theologically, I still believe that the ritual is good. I believe that praying for the dead in the divine services of the church is an act of love, and it's a beautiful thing that everyone should do for their loved ones who've departed. But I can see the way that it's performed can undermine that very ethic by introducing a class dimension into access to prayer. So for me, that this raises an ethical responsibility. I think at a minimum, I should be clear in my own belief that commemoration is available for everyone, regardless of their wallet. And I think this exercise made me wonder how many other rituals I practiced carry hidden assumptions or misinterpretations that can be harmful ultimately. And it's my responsibility to change. And so it looks like I'm right at time. So that is the end. There's my bibliography. Thank you for your time.